Crossing the Channel with Jane Austen. What if Jane in her day had been able to cross the Channel to continental Europe to visit just about any country she liked? What would she have encountered? What would it have been like, and how would she have liked it? I mean, France would definitely not have been a destination, let's face it. England spent most of its time at war with Napoleon in those days. But what if she'd been able to visit, say, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany? What would it have been like? Today's second stretch in our Georgian Sisters Express journey through the world of Jane Austen is going to take us to unexpected places in continental Europe. Welcome, I'm Diana, and together with my sister Lakshmi, we're not only preparing to launch an incredible online Jane Austen shop for you to enjoy, but we've also embarked on this amazing journey on our very own Georgian Sisters Express coach through the world of Jane Austen, discovering all we can about Jane Austen's life, her stories, her world then, but also the world of Jane Austen today. Why people continue to love her work so much. What is it that moves people? What is it they do with her stories? One of the things that fascinates us most, and that this journey is very much about as well, is imagining what her life was like, but also what her characters' lives might have been like, realistically speaking. What life in the Georgian era, and specifically the Regency, might have been like. And I was struck actually this week by a post on Facebook in which someone said, well, believe me, and that was in different wording, but believe me, if you'd known what it was really like in the Georgian era, you definitely would not have wanted to live in that period. And I'm much aware of that. And, definitely tell me in the comments if you have different thoughts on this. But I find that there are aspects of that life and the way we perceive it today that do really, really appeal to me. For one, we live in an era that is so noisy and busy, and that kind of slow pace and the sound of the coaches and horses passing rather than all the cars that you can hear passing over here and the airplanes that we're having to avoid all the time, etc. I mean, that definitely appeals to me. And the sort of elegant manners, the etiquette, the dances at the balls, etc. But I'm much aware that we're talking not only a very specific segment of society, but also that there were a lot of conditions that people, found normal in those days, that they, lived with, that to us would be quite awful. And one of the first things I think of is the position of women, really. And for that matter, obviously, the whole subject of inclusivity. I mean, to me, it's unthinkable. Coming from a family where we're very inclusive, we've got people from all over the world being part of the family. We're all very proud of it and we think it's wonderful. And I would hate to think that weren't part of my reality. And also as a woman, to feel that I depended fully on what sort of marriage I was going to manage to arrange for myself or have someone else arrange for me. That seems quite appalling. But I'm also thinking in terms of medical care and hygiene in general, or what if you were part of the poorer classes? I mean, it's still an issue today, but in those days I think it was even worse probably. And your chances of, finding a way out of that were so much more limited. So yes, I fully agree with what that particular person wrote in their post, that, come to think of it realistically, you really wouldn't want to be living in that, day and age. But that doesn't take away the fact that there are aspects of the Georgian world, aspects of the Regency era that absolutely make me dream, and particularly in the context of Jane Austen's stories. For example, I do love imagining going on a stroll in a beautiful Regency dress in a park like this one, or having a lovely ball in the evenings with our friends and potential Mr. Darcys. But then I also really like to investigate what was life really like with all the pros and cons. Earlier this year, I unexpectedly found myself at the Open Air Museum in Cloppenburg in Germany. It hadn't really been planned, and even when I got to the place, I didn't quite know what to expect. And as we went from one old mill to an old factory to whatever, we ended up in an old farmhouse with a barn dating back to roughly what would have been the Regency era in the United Kingdom. And I suddenly thought, we need to film this. This needs to be part of our Georgian Sisters Express journey, which of course we had already been planning. I will say, we filmed and I think it's worth watching it because we saw some amazing things. But we didn't have a proper camera with us. We just grabbed the phone, and because we hadn't really prepared this and hadn't ever really done this, we ended up filming it in a vertical position. So bear with us. Please forgive us for the limited quality of the sound, etc. But at least there weren't as many planes flying over. I think you're going to enjoy it as much as I did. I suddenly found myself in Germany around the time Jane Austen might have visited such places. Now, as I dreamt away about this, do forgive me again if I took it sort of lightly with the dates. I didn't think exactly in terms of 5 years more or less, but I could see that style-wise we were talking about the same era. So I loved to imagine, what if Jane had crossed the channel? What if she had visited the people who lived here? Now, of course, there'll be a lot of things, not only bits where I might have not got the date quite exactly right, but also where in these kind of museums, they will sometimes mix items and things from slightly later eras with slightly earlier ones, but altogether they give the sort of vibe of a roughly defined era. So if you know a lot more about this than I do, and you happen to spot things that make you go, hang on a minute, I think that date's from another time, do by all means tell me in the comments. But for now, just sit back, relax and enjoy, and let us take you on this unexpected stretch, actually sort of pre-stretch of the Georgian Sisters Coach Express journey on its way from Germany to Jane Austen and her world in England. This is a barn dating from 1821. We're in Germany here, in the Open Air Museum in Cloppenburg. And I'm totally fascinated because to think that this farm was built in the era that we love, particularly because of Jane Austen's stories, what was the Georgian era in the UK, and to imagine that across the channel here in Germany, this is what people lived like in a farm. So let's go and have a look around. You look at the curtains, the way they're draped, it's all simple, basic, but you sense that same sort of atmosphere and era. Translate it to a German farmhouse. When you look at the pictures, very familiar silhouettes in black, another one over there. You see that's a stove they would have used to keep warm. I'm kind of fascinated by the ceilings as well, the colours and the little designs on there. It's quite attractive in its own way. Looking at the bedrooms, the colour of the bedding, lovely little roses. I remember a friend having one of those when I was young. At the time you could still get those, probably came from her grandmother or something, but the quality would have been such that you could inherit this generation upon generation and still enjoy that atmosphere, breathe that atmosphere that's part of that era. Let's have another look around here in what was presumably the kitchen and dining area. Stove that would have given off so much heat. Interestingly, we grew up in a Frisian farmhouse in the north of the Netherlands, and we still had a stove smaller than this one, but that had these metal rings in it. This one's warm, by the way, which is great because it's really chilly today. Sunny but chilly. And we obviously didn't use it for cooking anymore, but we would sometimes. My mother would put kettles on there in our early years there to keep them warm. Later on it was removed once you got central heating. And that would have been the smart room. Recognise the feel of the era and could imagine, what if Lizzie Bennet, for example, Jane Bennet, had somehow been able to travel across the channel to a place like this and visit a farmer's family. And this is what they would have found. How fascinating is that? I think it would have been really rustic, really rural to them. Foreign as well. I think the difference between the European countries, yes, the UK is part of Europe, even if not of the EU anymore. The difference would have been bigger than it is nowadays. Obviously, the communication was more limited. So I'm sure there would have been differences in designs used, materials used. But at the same time, you sense that it's the same era, and I just love the thought that if any of Jane Austen's characters, or for that matter Jane Austen herself, had been able to travel here, this is what she would have found, and she might have dined with these people or sat down for tea here. Fascinating thought. Come on in. This is the master bedroom. It has again that mixture of elegance and at the same time it's quite rustic. I remember us having an old writing desk with a sort of cupboard sitting on top, and it had just the same sort of top as the beds here, the same sort of decorations, in that same sort of wood. Very interesting. The bedding. Gosh, that is a beautiful kind of lace. Imagine that all being handmade in very fine crochet. And that's where people would have washed. Mirror. This is quite a nice, large and elegant room, and again, interesting ceiling decorations. And the window is very recognisable, similar to the ones you would have seen in the UK around this era. And the lamp by the bed. Let's have a look at the lamp by the bedside. Very charming. So after having seen the master bedroom, look at me wearing my major shawl as a skirt because it's so freezing cold today. Everything I could find in my bag I've been pulling out and putting on, but it's worth it. Love to see that, how they keep all their smart crockery. It's beautiful. The combination of that white with the bright blue reminds me of the pottery from Cologne, which we saw in one of the other houses dating from another era, which is that sort of light grey with that same electric blue. It's a beautiful colour. And you find it again in the bedding actually. This beautiful linen bedding in these bed boxes. Might be a bit dark to see that, but this is obviously where staff would have slept and potentially children as well, I think. And not the worst place in a way, because at least that would be the heat from the stove up there. I love the little decorations in the wood and how the use of hearts is quite common. You see it on roof decorations and indoors when there's an opening in especially the toilets actually, the toilet doors tend to have these little hearts carved out at the top, which I always find, again, this old farmhouse that we grew up in, and for us it was very different because our parents were hippies and moved there, to leave the city, the bustle and the noise of the city behind. and to go back to basics, live in nature, grow our own vegetables, etc. So that's how we were born and grew up in the 70s. But our house was initially still quite outdated in a way, and gradually our parents did it up. And so we started off with a very old-fashioned toilet, and it had the cute little heart in the door as well. And it always fascinates me somehow because life was quite tough in many ways, I think, in that era, especially for people who lived in the country. And that sort of toughness, that survival, and the roughness of life somehow makes me feel as unlikely people would think in terms of sweet, cute decorations in the form of hearts, but they did, and I think that's beautiful. That shows that there was a lot more to it than I might imagine at first. So let me take you into the scullery and washing area of the house. I think this must be where they would have heated the water. You can see lots of different devices here that would have been used to do the washing up and the washing. See some linen drying over there. Very nice enameled buckets down there. And from here, we're moving into the stables, where they've actually put on some sort of sound tape of whatever sort with horses neighing, as if they were really out there in the stables. Oh look, there would have been a little corner for the people working in the stables, I would imagine. At least a nice little stove, that's good, and a bit of light, but it's very basic, with a definite charm to it. Now that reminds me of a barn dance I once went to in the country, somewhere in the UK. And that brings back really fond memories. I loved it. And it was the first time I was at an event that actually really brought back for me the feel of the balls in the Jane Austen series and films I'd been watching. It was obviously, again, more rustic, more basic in some ways, but really, really charming. I can really picture that happening in a place like this in the summer. Make space, flowers decorating the place, buffet, a little orchestra, and people enjoying a dance. And this is where the water would have come from. Scullery and washing section that we just had a look at is right here. There's a door there, so this is where they would have come out with their buckets and got the water. There's still some water in there. Time for all of us to make our wish right now. It'll come true if we wish it deeply enough. This place absolutely is wonderful. Do you remember that scene in the 1995 production, BBC production of Pride and Prejudice, where Jane and Lizzie are talking to each other while they're binding up the flowers and herbs? Well, this is just that sort of place. I always love that. I love how they walk around with those baskets, beautiful baskets, and how they pick and cut the herbs and flowers and then hang them to dry. Again, this would have been a more rural setting, but pretty much the same thing. Now this place is really worth a visit too. This is a farm that belonged to a very wealthy family. They built this house, sort of reconstructed it in a completely new modern style for their era, between 1803 and 1805. It's really grand with loads of wood, and it would have been really impressive. We're now inside the barn. Beautiful wooden structures, that would have been really top-notch for the era in which it was built by the very wealthy owners of this farm. Let's go inside the house. Like the wooden shoes, I'm more used to seeing the Dutch version of wooden shoes, and they would go up to here in wood, and that's really painful, I find, on the foot. As a child, I used to wear them sometimes. But here in Germany, they very cleverly made the gap bigger and put some leather over there. Much friendlier on the feet, I would say. Let's have a peek inside this lovely Sunday parlour. This would have been one of the sitting rooms that were used only on Sundays and special occasions. Really smart. Now the decorations on the wall date from 1818. However, the furniture, as you can kind of guess when you look at it, and some people would know a lot more about it than I do, but the first thing I thought when I noticed it was, that looks a bit more modern, and it is. It dates from 1860. Really smart sofa, beautiful writing desk there. Now this could really have been the sort of smart place of rich farmers that I imagine a wealthy British family, in case that they've known anyone in Germany, could have visited. So imagine them taking their tea here, looking through those windows. I love those curtains. They remind me of some of the dresses of the era, really. Semi-transparent, light material with a beautiful sort of folds that naturally fall into it. Love it. Something else I need to show you. This lovely little building was a dye house. So that's where fabrics would have been dyed. Now this dates from 1847, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, that's it, 1847. So that would have post-dated our stories a little bit, but not by very much. So have a look at these wonderful items they use. There's no one here to explain this to us right now, but I don't know if they're wood or some of them may be ceramic. I would guess they're wood by the look of things. All these very fine designs they made that they would imprint on the fabrics. And there you are, you've got your beautiful designs, elegant, ready to be used for anything you wanted. This is so exciting, especially when I look at the large fabric at the back with that very refined print. It reminds me of some of the dresses and the sort of prints that you would see in the Georgian era. I'm pretty sure that Jane or any of her lady characters would have loved to see how all these different designs were being created and printed on fabrics. You won't want to miss out on this. This is a tiny little shoemaker's workplace that dates back to 1836. Look how tiny it is, low ceilings, and several people would have been working around that miniature table, sitting on those tiny little stools. Look at all the tools they would have been using. And in the middle, in the center, you see that lamp, and you see that glass bowl next to it. That's what was called a shoemaker's sphere. That would have been filled with water and would beautifully spread the light from the lamp across the room, or at least around the table, so that everyone would have had some light while working long and late hours here. In addition to that, for a long time, it would have been really normal for people to not only work here, but kind of live here as well. Look at those wooden panels. They're not just wooden panels, they're alcoves or bed boxes. They would have slept right there where they spent all day and part of the night working. That was our little surprise excursion to the Cloppenburg Open Air Museum. Thank you so much for joining me here. I'm going to leave you with one last view of this delightful place. Well worth visiting. Bye. Get your free coach ticket now. Sign up below and hop on board the Georgian Sisters Express.